Good evening, America. You may want to take a seat for this one, because tonight's story isn't just about politics. It's about accountability, the kind that arrives when even the most powerful learn that the rules apply to them too. And yes, this story centers on Donald Trump. In New York, Attorney General Letitia James has pulled back the curtain completely, and what's been revealed is explosive. For years, Trump's empire and public image have revolved around one word: success. The towers, the gold lettering, the persona of the billionaire who could make America great again. But what if that success was built on illusion, on fraud, on inflated property values, fake numbers, and valuations that existed only in Trump's world, not the real one? That's exactly what Letitia James' investigation uncovered. Not minor accounting mistakes, but a long-term, systematic pattern of deception, a playbook in which Trump and his company allegedly manipulated asset values to win loans, dodge taxes, and mislead banks. And this isn't political theater. These are facts, supported by documents, sworn testimony, and court filings. The evidence doesn't shout, it quietly tells the truth, and that truth isn't gold-plated. Now, the walls of Trump Tower echo with something Trump has managed to escape for decades: consequences. This case isn't about campaign rallies or slogans, it's about numbers, signatures, and a paper trail that can't lie. Letitia James hasn't just exposed the figures, she's exposed the culture that allowed them. A culture where power replaced accountability, where deception became routine, and where truth was optional as long as the brand stayed shiny. Sometimes the most powerful stories in politics don't come from fiery speeches, but from documents, quiet, stubborn pieces of paper that refuse to be silenced. And tonight, those documents tell a story that could shatter one of America's biggest modern myths: the myth of Donald Trump, the self-made billionaire. James's team didn't just compile a few receipts, they built a meticulous, line-by-line map of how the Trump organization allegedly turned deception into a business model. Imagine a gleaming skyscraper over Manhattan, gold letters spelling Trump. It looks strong and untouchable, but according to James's findings, the numbers behind it tell a very different story. Properties valued one way for lenders and another for tax officials. A golf course suddenly worth hundreds of millions more, at least on paper. A penthouse magically tripling in size when it needed to. These weren't accidents. They were intentional manipulations, statements of financial condition that read less like spreadsheets and more like fiction. The goal? To make banks lend more, partners invest more, and the public believe more. And it wasn't hidden in offshore accounts or encrypted files. It was right there, in the open, submitted confidently as though the rules didn't apply. Maybe for a long time they didn't, because when image outweighs truth and money mutes questions, this is the result. But Letitia James didn't blink. Her office spent years collecting evidence, tracing every inflated number back to its source, and treating the case not as political theater, but as a financial investigation grounded in fact. The result is stunning. A legal case suggesting that Trump's empire may have been built not on solid gold, but on paper gold, the kind that collapses when exposed to light. And there's something poetic about it. The man who built his fame on branding, spectacle, and image now finds that very brand has become evidence against him. Every gold logo, every towering building, every grand claim, all of it now tells a new story: how illusion became liability. This isn't just a headline, it's the culmination of years of whispers, rumors, and unanswered questions, finally meeting the cold clarity of proof. It's the kind of accountability that people said would never come, the kind that powerful men in expensive suits always seem to avoid. But Letitia James didn't come to play politics, she came with evidence, and that evidence speaks louder than any campaign slogan ever could. And maybe that's why this moment feels different, because what's happening in New York right now isn't just about one man, it's about a system finally facing itself. For decades, Trump's business success was treated as gospel. Politicians used it, voters believed it, and media repeated it. But when the New York Attorney General lays out documents showing a pattern of fraud so deep that it touches nearly every corner of the Trump organization, we have to ask, was the empire ever real?
Or was it just a brilliant illusion sold to America? Letitia James hasn't just exposed the figures, she's exposed the culture that allowed them. How wealth, fame, and bravado can rewrite reality, at least for a while. But paper trails have a way of surviving bluster. They don't care how loud you yell or how many rallies you hold. Numbers don't chant, they testify. And so as this case unfolds, one thing becomes clear. The story of Donald Trump's empire is no longer being told by Trump itself, it's being told by accountants, auditors, and investigators who have no interest in applause, only in truth. And that's the story Letitia James has brought to the forefront. A story not of success, but of exposure. Not of triumph, but of truth finally catching up. Because when the facts are this detailed, when the evidence is this precise, and when even the paperwork starts to tell a different story, well, that's when the myth begins to crack. And in that crack, sometimes history changes. For years, the legend of Donald Trump has been one of America's most persistent myths. The story of the self-made billionaire who turned his name into gold, his ambition into empire, his brand into power. It's a tale that millions bought into, not because it was proven, but because it was sold so well. The gleaming towers, the marble lobbies, the jet with his name across the side, it all whispered the same message: success. But tonight, as the evidence mounts, that whisper has changed. What once sounded like triumph now sounds like illusion cracking in real time. Letitia James' investigation hasn't just challenged Trump's finances, it's punctured the very image he built his political identity on. Her findings have revealed how the myth of the self-made man wasn't born in the marketplace, it was engineered in the boardroom. It was fed not by hard-won victories, but by exaggerated numbers, inflated valuations, and a relentless effort to turn perception into currency. Because when you control the story, you can control the value. Think about how powerful that illusion was. Trump's rise wasn't only about real estate, it was about branding reality itself. Every project, every headline, every handshake was part of the performance. He wasn't just selling condos or casinos. He was selling himself as proof that the American dream still worked. And for a long time, it did. The gold-leafed image was convincing, the confidence intoxicating. Even banks, people who were literally paid to question numbers, looked at Trump's statements and saw opportunity. They saw glamour where they should have seen red flags. But here's the hook. The same charisma that fueled his rise has now become evidence in his undoing. The overstatements that once built his legend have turned into data points in a fraud case. Every time he said, "I'm worth billions," the question wasn't whether he believed it, it was whether the numbers ever matched the words. Letitia James's team went in to find out, and what they found was staggering. According to her findings, properties that should have been valued at $100 million were magically worth $300 million when it suited the paperwork. Net worths ballooned and shrank, like stage props, depending on who was watching. And that's the real story. Not just that Trump exaggerated, but that exaggeration was the business model. The myth of the self-made billionaire wasn't a side effect of success. It was the product being sold. It was the bait that drew investors, the aura that opened doors, the illusion that made banks say yes. And once you see that, you realize the genius and the danger of Trump's brand. It blurred the line between truth and theater so effectively that even seasoned professionals stopped asking where one ended and the other began. Now, as the case unfolds, we're watching something rare in American history, a carefully curated persona being stripped back layer by layer, not by political rivals, but by auditors, attorneys, and spreadsheets. And as each document surfaces, it reveals how fragile that myth really was. The penthouse that was supposedly 30,000 square feet, turns out it was closer to 10,000. The golf courses that magically tripled in worth overnight, adjusted valuations that made banks drool. The self-made fortune that began with $1 million loan from his father, now dwarfed by the billions in questionable valuations that came later. But this isn't just about Trump. It's about how America falls for stories. We love the idea of the lone genius, the renegade who bends the system and still wins. Trump understood that hunger better than anyone.
He transformed business into entertainment, debt into spectacle, and wealth into performance art. Trump didn't just play the game, he made it look glamorous. And in doing so, he taught an entire generation that success wasn't about achievement, but appearance. The irony is that his myth worked almost too well. It carried him from the business world to reality television, and eventually to the White House. The man who branded himself as the ultimate dealmaker ended up making a deal with the American people, selling the same story he'd sold all his life. Trust me, I win. But now, in court filings and sworn testimony, the numbers are speaking louder than the slogans, and they tell a different story. One built not on triumph, but on desperation, manipulation, and a deep fear of the truth catching up. Letitia James's investigation doesn't just challenge Trump's personal wealth. It questions the entire culture that celebrated image over integrity. For decades, the Trump myth wasn't only his creation. It was America's reflection. We wanted to believe that anyone could rise to the top, that money proved virtue, that success equaled truth. But as the smoke clears, what remains isn't an empire of greatness, it's an architecture of illusion. And every illusion eventually collides with reality. Sometimes that reckoning comes slowly. A lawsuit here, a leak there. But sometimes, as now, it happens all at once. Documents surface, witnesses speak, and the myth begins to buckle under its own weight. The man who once seemed larger than life is discovering that facts don't care about fame. Numbers don't lie, even when people do. So when we ask if the myth of the self-made billionaire is dying, we might really be asking whether America is ready to stop confusing appearance with integrity. The gold letters may still gleam on skyscrapers, but the truth, once exposed, dulls even the brightest facade. There's an old saying in investigative journalism: people lie, but paper doesn't. And tonight, that paper, the documents unearthed by New York Attorney General Letitia James, is speaking louder than any rally, louder than any midnight post. It speaks in the quiet language of numbers, valuations, and signatures, a language that can't be spun. Those documents don't shout, they reveal, line by line, a story that's been hiding in plain sight for decades. The story of how numbers were bent and inflated to make a fragile empire look indestructible. Here's the simple truth. When most people apply for a loan, they tell the truth. They list what they own, what they owe, and what their assets are really worth. But according to James's findings, Trump's playbook was different. When he needed money, values mysteriously rose. When it was time to pay taxes, they shrank. It was financial shape-shifting, powered by confidence, influence, and the belief that no one would ever look too closely. But Letitia James did look closely. Her team followed the paper trail through real estate records, loan applications, tax filings, and emails, and what they uncovered wasn't confusion or sloppy math. It was strategy disguised as accounting, deliberate, repeated, and systematic. A property worth millions on one document would suddenly be worth far less on another. It wasn't coincidence, it was culture. A worldview where rules were flexible, ethics negotiable, and truth just another marketing tool. And now, Trump's own words and signatures have become evidence. Every document he signed is a brick in the growing wall of proof. These aren't anonymous spreadsheets. They bear his name, his numbers, his intent. Together, they tell a single story, that perception was power, and power could rewrite reality. The brilliance or audacity of Trump's empire was its dependence on belief. If people believed in the brand, the details didn't matter. A $200 million property could become $500 million with the right signature. Banks trusted it. Investors cheered it. The media amplified it. The illusion worked until someone finally asked for receipts. And when those receipts landed on the desk of New York Attorney General Letitia James, they told not a story of success,
but of systematic deception, a pattern embedded in the DNA of the business. James's team uncovered overstatements that weren't isolated mistakes, but recurring practices spanning years, properties, and deals. That repetition wasn't random. It was a business model. And once those documents entered the public record, the myth began to unravel. Picture investigators in a room surrounded by boxes of statements and ledgers, realizing they weren't just reviewing bad math. They were dismantling the foundation of an empire built on exaggeration. For decades, Trump's greatest weapon wasn't money. It was narrative. He told a story of winning so convincingly that even the numbers seemed afraid to disagree. But paper doesn't care about charisma. It doesn't care about applause or image. Paper waits. It endures. And eventually, it tells the truth. When those financial statements were finally laid bare, the contrast was undeniable. Properties valued far beyond reality, assets existing in a fantasy world where everything Trump touched turned to gold. When confronted, his team dismissed the inconsistencies as opinions, not fraud. But in the eyes of the law, numbers don't have opinions. They either add up or they don't. And that's the essence of this case. Beneath all the noise, politics, and personality, what remains is paper. And paper doesn't lie.